This is Art Sense, a podcast focused on educating and informing listeners about the past, present, and future of art. I'm Craig Gould. On today's episode, I speak with renowned Spanish sculptor Cristina Iglesias. Iglesias is known for her immersive and poetic installations that blend organic forms with architectural elements to create spaces that invite viewers to engage with notions of memory and imagination. Her latest exhibit, titled Ellipsis, is up now through January 27th at Marian Goodman's Los Angeles Gallery. And now, a discussion about the construction of temporal and imaginary spaces with artist Cristina Iglesias. Cristina Iglesias, thank you so much for joining me this week on the Art Sense podcast. Cristina, I wanted to speak with you because you have a show going on right now at Marian Goodman Gallery in Los Angeles, the title of which is Ellipsis. It's up now through January 27th. And Cristina, a lot of times when I speak with the artists, I like to start with a hypothetical, which is, let's say you are sitting at a dinner party next to someone who has never met you. They have no idea who you are or what you do. And they ask you, about you and your work. Where do you start to describe what you do?
So difficult. I would say that to start. But yes, I think I could describe my work as the construction of places to be, places to cross sometimes, to look at. I do work very much around the physical experience that a viewer, a walker in the city can have in those places that I construct, especially talking about public pieces, that not all of the work I do is big and public, but especially in those pieces that is a constant, but also I would say that even smaller pieces, studio pieces, deal with those issues that I just said, and also very much related to it with time and the time involved in it, but also I use mechanics sometimes to create fictions that actually work with time, a fictional time that I construct, which would be a sequence that sometimes, normally repeats, but that creates and triggers the sense of perception that a viewer can have with art and to attend it more curiously and surprisingly.
So when you start talking about creating places, that begin to kind of lean into architecture. And I know that you've had the benefit of working with some of the world's leading names in architecture. But there's a line between architecture and creating these fictional spaces. And I imagine that you and the architect appreciate the space that each of you carve out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that in those cases that I work with architects in architectural projects, as I said, there is already a thing and sort of architectural thinking in the proposition of my work internally, but thinking about perception, etc. But it's true that when I work with architects, we try to create places of gathering places. What I was saying before, places where people can meet and with people they know or people they don't know, or as I was mentioning, the idea of being attending, mesmerized sometimes because of the flow of water or the movement of a door or just nature in relation with that fiction. All that is something that I bring, like a human side to a building, for example, or I would say also to the urbanism of a city, to cut the flow of the movement of people in a city with a piece and recall that attention or surprise them. Or also, I think a lot in the maybe illusion that people will come more than once, and especially depends where that piece is. But if you have to go there or you pass by, and you will see it at a different state, and or you yourself, because they have a heavy, I think, strong, more than heavy psychological side of how that affects your senses and your emotions. And all that is what I try to bring to these projects of architecture. Apart from a side that sometimes it's also functional, functional in reality, like for reasons of security or safety, to create, like in London, the Bloomberg headquarters is about the piece that I did is like a moat replaces big walls of protection. So instead of having a wall that protects from a car to get into it and have an aggression, the piece creates a place to be, and at the same time creates a distance and a depth and an illusion of continuity, which is also something that I work very much, for example, under the building, to create the feeling that not only the feeling, the awareness that everything under what we construct flows and runs and is there.
Some of the spaces are in the ground, and you're creating fictions about kind of an imagined natural habitat. But other spaces that you create do work with the concept of walls and labyrinths, like the installation that you did at the Royal Academy. It's rather maze-like. It makes me really think about how in our childhood we are so predisposed to spaces like the fort made out of blankets or the tree house. How there's something about that enclosure that I think carries over to something like being immersed in the middle of a Richard Serra sculpture, right? And I feel like some of your pieces, really kind of evoke that same enveloping.
That's interesting. Yes, I think, as you were describing that experience being a child, but also today to see if I do a room that has a idea, or let's say a small experience of labyrinth inside, like the piece you were referring to at the Royal Academy, and others like the one at the lighthouse in the island in San Sebastian, they always look bigger when you are inside than when you see them from outside, because the experience is the details that you are describing require your imagination to go further. Like in the Royal Academy, you have the spontaneous, as I call, landscape surrounded is the real landscape, the fictional landscape, and the reflection of that, of those sides. So, and yourself, of course, in it. So all that, even if there are just a few edges and turns around, etc., and two entrances, but is this idea that connects with the forest also, the idea that to get lost, but at the same time, you can find a place where you feel like protected, and all these feelings that are so difficult to describe or to think that you can do a sculpture that talks about that. I compare it sometimes with the capacity of illusion that a painter like, I don't know, like Turner has, or had, or has, still has, of course, of painting an emotion, painting a tempest that you have never been in, but you feel it. And this sort of of perceptions are the ones that I try to create in, and there is always also an element of surprise involved. I don't know if my reference is so much Serra's, but it is true that it has these fantastic pieces that to enter in them is an experience and is not the same than seeing them from outside. But yeah, I think my reference are more, yes, as I said, the forest. Also to think in our society, as I was saying, to stop, and sometimes I'm very conscious of that when I work in the public space, and also to create a certain intimacy in the urban forest, the urban field, no?
So you mentioned earlier how you create fictions, and for listeners, maybe we can talk a little bit about what that means. I think there are a couple of things in play. One, the surfaces that you use are very organic, but they're constructed, right? It's a constructed organic fiction. But a big part of the fiction that you create is also with the use of water. In some cases, it's a matter of convincing a viewer that particular fountains that you have set up are actually one sort of tributary, one river or creek, but they're not even connected. Or you were speaking of Hanalea, the lighthouse, San Sebastian. I have not been there, so I've not experienced it, and I know you made the video so that we can try to perceive what's going on there, but my perception is that when the water rushes in and then drains away, it's really emulating the waves, almost entering like a cave, but being perched 60, 70 feet up on a rock. It's obvious that can't be natural, right? You've constructed something that feels familiar, but it's obviously constructed.
Right. And yeah, to work with memory in different ways. I think, for example, in the example that you just mentioned, in Nondalia, you have to, the journey is part of it. And you take a little boat, it's just 10 minutes from the shore, and you see the reality. You confront, or even by walking along the shore, that is something that I also recall in the piece. You see the reality, and also is in your memory somehow. In the memory of anybody, a child remembers having seen the waves hitting the rocks, etc. When you arrive to the island, you have to go up and you visit the island, and then you enter which is very small, and you enter, and then you confront this vision and this experience, which also has sound, which is very important, because of course all that movement and crashing of the water against this composition of appearance of a bronze cave that seems to be connected with other caves in the whole island, because, as you said, the water is far, but many people think that it's coming from the sea, people even from the city. So it's a beautiful way how our memory and our sight works, no, and our rememberings. And then when you confront to the experience of the sequence, and also you look further and more in detail, and that happens in many of my pieces. I imagine that there is a moment that you are not longer seeing what you are looking at. You're seeing into yourself or your own memories, and you leave with the memory of what you have seen. When you arrive to the shore, you look at the mountain, at the little island, and you see the house up there, and you remember what's happening there, no? And that fictional reality, let's say, as you mentioned, is something that I believe opens doors, in our perception to wonder and to understand, and also look to nature and be conscious also that how we have to take care of it in that piece, for example, but also in the piece at the entrance of the museum in Houston. In one of the pieces that is at Marian Goodman exhibition, they are made with an imprint of real rocks hidden by wind with time, etc. Then those are only textures that after I modulate to make the final form, and they talk about those the limit. I mean, the moment where the ground meets the ocean, and I love that. To think that border, that edge, no, is the that also is full of well, in some places, and especially there where I did this piece, you can see the strata that tells you the edge of the earth and the idea of time, no? That is so beautiful to be conscious of it.
Well, I know you're from the Basque region of the north of Spain, but when I look at your work and I hear you describe, the lighthouse, the Honda, just the way you describe it really almost reminds me of Alhambra. The surprise of the water being up on a mountaintop, away from the sea, and just the created spaces and what the sound and the water, how it transforms the space, and how there's this intent of creating these small, intimate spaces that are transformative. Can you talk about Alhambra? I mean, is it something that you've maybe not taken inspiration for, but at least have appreciation of?
Of course, no, absolutely. I mean, admiration for it. What also talks about how the Islamic culture is so into our own culture. Also, the Jewish, you can see it there, that is surrounded by the Jewish quartier. And the Alhambra is so, amazing how it's constructed with different spaces, different patios, with water, with sound sometimes that is constructed in a room that you go close and you can, if somebody's whispering on the other side, you can hear it. The gardens, I've learned, has been a great inspiration for me. I not only admit it, I celebrate it as part of the culture that I've been drinking from, and and also, yes, I've constructed a lot with jalousies, with screens that are very much in many of the cultures to hide or to see and not being seen, or also to cover yourself from the intense light. And as you know, also I've worked a lot and I've constructed spaces that even if they also touch the sci-fi world, because there is always a substratum of the fantasy, of a fantastic place, a place that is, you can have a real experience, but always connects you with a dream-like experience. I was saying that I have taken a lot from that also with the screens, constructing places that can be indoors or outdoors, and create, work with light, creating also shadows of those texts, etc. So talking about the Alhambra also in the texts, also the, it's like the writings, on the walls that you cannot, you cannot interpret, you will need so much time to be close there to be able to read it. And this is also something that I love,
It's almost like graffiti writing. It's almost intentionally hard to read. And I know that you sort of incorporate that into your screens. If I understand right, the screens that you use, like the Jardin Elomar or the screens that are in this current show at Marian Goodman, my understanding is that there's text embedded in there that we may not really get the benefit of being able to figure out what it is, but it's embedded into the screens.
That's right. Yes, it's like waved into it. I mean, it's more complex than just but I mean, there is a trick of, it's welded and the traces are made by a machine that I fabricated. Well, anyway, at the end is like, yes, like a text that is, I like the idea that the text is the structure of the piece itself. And there is a narrative. I mean, there is always a part of that, like, for example, of J.G. Ballard, The Crystal World. I did 3 suspended corridors in Köln, and also other authors like Stanislav Lem in LA. But is that those texts is true, as I was saying about hieroglyphic, that you are not able to read, but is there, and actually it's about the trace, it's about the signals. They have an order. You read them from inside, not from outside. Maybe you read just a few letters, or you can read interior or something. But you need time for it. That, of course, nobody will give so much time to read the whole text, and is sometimes impossible somehow because of the superposition of the. But all this is also is always a metaphor, and is to talk not only about that complexity, but also about the richness of construction, and all that can involve so many readings and so many different views. Even what the shadows can do. I mean, in sculptural terms, also that is an installation that has every time is different. Every time you install it is different, and the light can go even to the walls or just only to the floor, and then it's colored. Well, because in that text in LA, the text itself talks about color and that precise color. But anyway, it's full of different strata of meaning that at 10 maybe are only important for me, but I think there is a message in it that people somehow get.
What I sensed when looking at the piece in LA is that as you enter, you're surrounded by one layer of screen, but as you work towards the center of the piece, kind of in a spiral, the walls become more and more opaque by the layering of the screens that once you're in the center, you no longer have one layer of screen that you're looking through multiple layers of screen. And that provides a different sensory experience as you travel through this created space.
That's right, yes. I mean, the traveling in it, through it, is one, and it changing all the time. Also, the vision you have from to the outside, and the sense that you get more and more hidden in it. And maybe you pass by another person that you have to go to, to make space to be able to cross. And yes, I think it has that. It creates a feeling of staying there, staying in maybe in the center or in one side, and then you start to be mesmerized. And as I said, it's all my pieces, I think they have also a very psychological side, that it affects you, and you start thinking in other things too, which is something that I believe that art has this power, and that's why I think is important also in the future of cities, and that's why to go to museums also is important, because they really, I mean, you can, as I was while talking about the memory, the collective memory and the personal memory we have. I mean, you share that. It's a sharing experience that you have with those that have gone that day to see the show, or in the street, or wherever the art is, and they there is a sharing experience, and which I think is very important to be considered when we think in, as I said, in the future of the cities. No?
Can we talk a little bit more about the piece that you did in the Sea of Cortez? Because it's very interesting in that someone would have to be very deliberate and use special equipment to go see it and touch it. But it's bringing life back to an entire ecosystem. There's something quite tied to your work in that just knowing that it's there makes it a reality in our minds. Can you talk a little bit about everything that you brought to that project?
Yes, well, as when we were saying, well, I'm interested also in the concepts of growth and metamorphosis, even in those fictional rooms that we were talking before, talking about the labyrinths. There, I did that piece as part of with marine biologists as part of a project of creation of places where you cannot fish, like I mean, where people, I say, cannot fish, but also is very close to the manglars, so the little fishes can go, and it's an idea of protection. But of course, it's a symbol because it is big. There are like 3 rooms that you can enter. But of course, if you think the project they had is real, they are activists and they are doing this as a political, and at that moment, me too. But my contribution is very small compared to what it needs to be done. But it is very interesting how my ideas that I always had of how the patinas of time. I mean, how to accept that organisms can grow, and even in a fountain, that is not underwater, but has water that runs. Water is life, so it creates life, and life grows there. And there is a metamorphosis in the sense that one little thing becomes a flower, becomes a coral, so to accept that also in a philosophical way. I mean, for me, was a great opportunity to think that art can be, I mean, you can control it. Actually, it is more like a sort of, well, as I describe, there are jealousy screens that have a text that talk about the New Indies, the it's called moral, but it doesn't matter. The thing is that text and the openings in all those walls that construct these rooms, they are now, we have been following, making photos and film, and there is like a lab of life, how life can grow with a piece and be part of it. And there are fishes that, a morena that is living in a letter, and others are covered. It's beautiful and full of plankton. But of course, it's true that you need either to go, well, because it's 17 to 20 meters down, so you need oxygen to be in it. To look at it, you can snorkel and see it from above, like an old city down there. But to be in it, that you still can enter, and because it's made in a way that life covers it, but it's not an object that is totally covered. It's really an architecture, so you can enter, and we did it also with a very special ecological concrete that allows life to grow in it, and so all these. I mean, these ideas, the idea that you have to travel there, know that the piece is there. Of course, people there in La Paz, they tell, and there are some signs, but very little. And it requires an act of belief when you look at it, and you cannot go down to say, well, this exists there, You have seen photos, you have seen maybe a film, and I think in that sense, the piece is everything, it's also those images that are possible because the piece exists.
I feel like I've seen a gallery exhibit where you actually used an aquarium, a very large aquarium, to almost display the work as if it were like an architectural scale model, so that someone can, again, imagine what that reality is. And, I think it's interesting in that same gallery exhibit, you were talking about creating space. I remember on the walls, you had these enormous screen prints of hallways. And so it's even there creating this illusion of space. Can you talk about creating a space for people to emotionally connect in a small room, the same sort of principles that you are trying to communicate on the bottom of the ocean or in that urban forest?
Yes, that's very interesting because connects when you do a show in a gallery or in a museum. This idea of connection of pieces that actually I do think a lot in it, and is not only for a show. I mean, also I think in real terms that a piece that I do in Toledo, maybe underground, is connected with one in LA, or in another place in the world. And in that sense, when I do an exhibition, for example, the pothos, that are pieces that have a more or less domestic size. I mean, that is a sculpture in stone, and then they are also studies to study how the form affects the movement of the water, how I can create a sequence, what is the act of looking down, how it affects your perception, the act of surprise that suddenly there is no water and suddenly comes up, how it changes, what it veils and reveals when it goes down. All these strategically installed, I think, can maybe talk about what you are saying. This, I mean, to reconstruct or construct, not from scratch, from somebody that hasn't seen anything or nothing of my work, to get connected with these feelings that you would have too in a different way if you go, for example, to a remote piece that is not so easy to go. But then that's why I was saying that those models or images or films that I do are so important, because sometimes I do these small documentaries that I call guided tours, that they go through all my pieces, and is a way of looking into my work and from my work to look to the world. And that aquarium that you were referring to, yes, I did 4 aquariums before in the process of preparing the piece in Baja California, in Espiritu Santo, in the Mar of Cortez. And yes, I was then studies of formal, also the optics, because it is curved. And actually, when you are underwater, there is an optical sensation, also feeling of that the visual is not totally as we see outside. There is, like, if there is a lens that distorts somehow. It depends also on the moment of the year, the month you go, etc. So going back to what you asked me, I think that when I installed an exhibition, there is all these elements, even two-dimensional elements that come from drawings and photo screens that are on metals, and all the ideas of reflection or on silk and painted on top. And they are all studies, and they are at the same time connected with those pieces that are more, as I said, remote, or even if they're in the same show, they are connected. And I like to, it's a complex connection. It's not an obvious connection. But I am very, very interested in explore more and more.
I know a lot of your work deals with the concept of memory, and I know one of the things that I find really interesting about memory is that it is not as solid and reliable as we think it is. Our memories are actually broken up and stored in multiple places in our brain, and when we call upon a memory, our brain reassembles it, and supposedly every time we reassemble a memory, we're only getting like 60% of the information, and our brain fills in the gaps, right? And the more you call upon the memory, the more you change it. And it just makes me think that, there is a really fine line between memory and imagination. Can you kind of talk about how your work really lives in that really foggy space between memory and imagination?
Yes, that's very interesting. I a piece I did in New York a year and a half ago at the park, Madison Square Park, is called Landscape and Memory, and it deals with that concept of physically. I mean, there were 5 spaces in bronze. It talks about a river that used to go through more or less the park. I mean, in that area, we move it a little bit in studying the maps. But of course, it is. Then we planted grass in between those elements, creating that curves that I imagine looking at the maps that the river could have. And also anybody could think, well, this is a humidity that goes underneath this humid, like with those pieces that I do in twine that grow, is like an humidity makes grow this strange between vegetal and animal growths, on the walls. In that case, because of that fragmentation, and I would say in many works, your imagination has to complete the work. That happens also with abstraction all the time. And actually, I use imprints of reality, but in a very abstract way. I mean, the composition of the total is quite abstract, especially if you look from a distance. And then when you get closer to it, you recognize some things, but also when you are distant, you imagine already what it could be, what that is, what it triggers in your memory. As you were saying, that is a memory that is filtered by so many other memories, and you construct a new memory that day, that moment that you are living. And this is, of course, drives me to the idea that also you create landscape and memory is something you have that responsibility also to when you work especially again at the public side, no, but in any space you create a landscape that we can get into our memory and filter it, and maybe what we will remember will be different than what it was, but is there somewhere.
I think what is beautiful about that piece and other work is the fact that it is so site specific. Not only are you transforming that place, but you're making reference to what this place was, a reference to its unseen history.
That's right. But I have to add that that specificity that I work very much in a site sensitive way, it meaning that it's universal because there are river lost everywhere in the planet.
Right.
So that, I mean, I study the context and always try to relate to it, so that there is also that side of history and of memory, as we as I was saying, I mean, collective memory that we can have that makes us also reflect on what we are constructing on top, the idea of layering of cultures, etc. But that is universal. So it's something that are pieces that, and it happens to me that many times I do pieces that they say, well, it was done just for this place. And you say, it cannot live anywhere else. And I say, no, it can live in there. You can install it like in an exhibition or in another place, and it works because, I think it's a thinking that goes beyond the specific site.
The show that's up at Marian Goodman, Ellipsis, is it just the screen piece, or are there other pieces installed there?
Yeah, there are other pieces, and that are, I think they have, a complex relation. Well, not complex because I want to make it complicated, but because they are somehow also independent. And so Ellipsis that comes from this idea that is in the book, I mean, in the text of Stanislav Lem, that talks about this planet that is an ocean that is intelligent and absorbs the dreams, etc. Well, it's very and talks about colors. It's a very descriptive, because always I use texts that describe a place. So construct a place with a description of another place. In this case, is a planet that has this elliptical form and is an ocean. And then there is a piece on the wall that is like a whirlpool in bronze, quite big, that talks about the idea of turbulence. Turbulence, it feels like a turbulence that can be in the ocean, but could be also, it can be liquid, but could be air, could be in space, could be mental, because mental turbulence is also a description of the chaos in our. So there is that other piece on the same. Those two are in the same room, in the biggest room of the gallery, and then there is a piece that is called. Is part of a series. Well, I've done 3 of called Littoral. So there is. It is like a rock, but very also modeled with different textures, but has holes in it, and there is some water inside that moves. This is in another room, and I call it lunar meteorite. So it is the whole show has this idea, and then there is this piece on the wall that is one of the entwined, that is like this organism that you cannot for sure know what it is, but is, as I was saying, in between a vegetal or animal that grows on a wall. And then there are some prints also in copper, that they are studies of caves, of sea caves, and some paperwork in a little room. So the whole show has a line of connection between pieces that are independent at the same time.
Well, as I hear you describe it, I certainly sense your appreciation for science fiction. The vocabulary you're using, it seems to be flying through outer space.
Well, actually, yes, I think also that with sculpture, one can construct a moment of suspension in time that actually is like a photograph. And you have this, as we were saying, these images that you can imagine because you cannot see completely, no?
Well, Cristina, I cannot thank you enough for your time today. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation about your work, and I really appreciate you sharing these insights, and I just really appreciate your time.
Me too, and appreciate that you invited me to this talk.
Absolutely. That's all the time we have for this week. You've been listening to Art Sense. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe. And while you're there, please rate the show and leave a quick review. Your feedback is the key to other folks finding us. And if you'd like to see images related to the conversation, read the transcript, and find other bonus features, you can go to cambia.art and click on the podcast tab. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can email me at craig@cambia.art. Thanks for listening.